for us here. Please keep your microphones muted. And most folks have gotten pretty used to that in our Zoom world these days. Because this is a presentation and engagement with the authors, one of the best ways to do that is to use speaker view. And also questions, please ask your questions through chat. I'll then say them out loud, and that way we can all hear what was asked and allow an opportunity for feedback and response. Okay, so it's 12:04, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know that more people will be joining us over the course of the time that we have together, but it's cold, it's winter, there's no snow really, but at least we've got the cooler temperatures. Maybe where Sal is up in New Hampshire, maybe there's some snow, I don't know. But in any event, this is a great opportunity for us to come together and celebrate the publishing of a book by a friend of ours in the Massachusetts community, Kim Vermeer, and her colleague and co-author, Walker Wells. I am a little envious right now of Walker because he's in LA. So as I'm in a sweater, he's able to be a little bit more dressed down or not bundled up as much as the rest of us are. That being said, they have written a fabulous book that has gotten quite a bit of attention within our field, and it's a pleasure to celebrate that with the authors today. The book, for those of you who aren't aware, is called The Blueprint for Greening Affordable Housing. It came out last year. And one of the things that I think all of us within the community development field can deeply appreciate is that it's addressing the lack of affordable housing and the climate crisis, which, as the description says, are two of the most pressing challenges facing cities today. And I think we could double underline that to say the least. I'll read a little bit here just to kind of give a preface before I make the introduction of the authors. Blueprint for Greening Affordable Housing is the most comprehensive resource on how green building principles can be incorporated into affordable housing design, construction, and operation. In this fully revised edition, Walker and Kimberly capture the rapid evolution of green building practices and make a compelling case for integrating green building and affordable housing. The Blueprint offers guidance on innovative practices, green building certifications for affordable housing, and the latest financing strategies. And the book was published by Island Press. So I deeply encourage you to go and check that out. So without further ado, I very much am pleased to welcome the two authors of the book, Kim Vermeer from Boston, Massachusetts, and a member of the Massachusetts community development world, and her colleague and co-author, Walker Wells. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hand this off to you.
Terrific. Well, I'm so excited to be here and to be able to introduce you to Walker, and for the two of us together to be able to share with you our labor of love over the last couple of years, our book. I'm gonna put a screen, I'm gonna share my screen. So we have some slides. Let me put it in presentation mode. Here we go. So I know many of you, and many of you know me, but I'm Kim Vermeer. I'm based in Boston, and I've been a long time advocate for and leader and practitioner in green building and sustainability in the affordable housing world. And Walker, my co-author, is based in LA, as you've heard. And Walker, maybe you'd like to just introduce yourself to everyone as well. Are you there? Oh.
Yes, hi, can you hear me, Kim? Hi, having a little connectivity challenges. Yes, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit about our book. And yeah, I'm with consulting firm Ramey Associates in Los Angeles, and do quite a bit of work on sustainable cities, as well as been involved in green affordable housing for over 20 years. I met Kim, I don't know, 15 years or so ago when she was out in San Diego doing a presentation for the San Diego Housing Federation. And I've continued to have this collaboration, and then it's led to what we're going to talk about today. So happy to be here.
So here's what we're going to talk through over the next 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for discussion. So a little bit of context. The irony is a book takes a while to write, to plan, to decide to do it, to work it out with your publisher, to actually write it, for your publisher to actually produce it. And so in our book, we have our last chapter is trends. Where do we see, having mastered the fundamentals, where do we see the trends in sustainability in the affordable housing industry? And then 2020 happened. So we'll start with that context, and then we'll just walk you through the content of the book, and then hopefully have some time for Q&A at the end. And so the trends that we identified were that, although we've talked about energy efficiency and sustainability, really the language that we're using is shifting to be thinking more directly and speaking more directly to climate, to decarbonization, and to the need for climate resilience as big drivers of how we think about sustainability. And there's a growing connection and understanding of the role that housing and health play together, and how we need to think about them as a set of things. And that social cohesion and social equity are some of the drivers and the values behind the work that we're doing in affordable housing. And that also, we can't think about green as just a thing for buildings. It's really about the neighborhood, the community, the city, the region, and we have to think about those things. Well, those were our trends. And then 2020 happened. And as you all have been living, certainly health and COVID-19 and everything that has meant for us in our own work, in our own lives, in the lives of the communities that we house and serve, has just been completely overwhelming in 2020 and still into 2021. And with the call to greater racial equity, we are really seeing a shift in the language and the understanding of how our work is grounded in social equity and racial equity. And climate, with wildfires, with droughts, with storms, we are all seeing the daily impacts now of climate and the need for direct response to reduce what's happening with climate and also to be resilient for it. And so some of the larger context that drives our thinking about green is about some of the historical inequities, and Walker's just going to take us through a couple of examples of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's just a few examples related to sort of good rates of infection as well as urban heat. And so this slide just overlays the pattern of COVID infections in Chicago, Cook County with the historic redlining maps, that created restrictions on access to mortgages. And so not surprisingly, you can see that in many of the areas that are red, which were limited in getting access to mortgage financing, which led to disinvestment over time. There's also a higher rate of COVID infection. So the point here is some of these sort of historic decisions, things that have happened in the past, continue to reflect themselves in the present. And those need to be taken into consideration. And then similarly on on heat, you see the map up at the top left, and then you can start to see some of these relationships between ambient air temperature being higher in the areas that receive less investment, greater degree of paved surfaces, and less tree canopy cover. And so what we're seeing here in Richmond, Virginia is just another example of how these sort of historic patterns continue to manifest themselves in the present, which in our context just means, thinking about green affordable housing from a bit of a system standpoint and as a sort of systemic intervention in some of these patterns to say, yes, we need the housing, but it should be healthy, it should be green, it should be prepared for climate change because we're dealing with both past issues and immediate concerns and future concerns with climate change. And then on this next one, I think we're just seeing that housing security, a lot of our point of departure was, yes, we need more affordable housing. Let's build it, the best way possible. But we're also just seeing some of these just more sort of foundational issues of, access to housing, as a human right, the ability to have housing security. And so I think, and there was just a paper in the article in the LA Times about this same issue this morning. California is anticipating a wave of evictions. But the connection here is that so many of some of the most stable housing for low-income people, of course, is the housing that's built by the community-based organizations, by the community development corporations, partly because of the restrictions from the tax credit, but also because it's part of their mission. And you'll see in a few more slides how we're working to link the green aspect to the core mission of affordable housing development and preservation. So this is just a couple outtakes from the preface that that Kim and I each wrote for the book about why we wrote it. And I think I was interested in writing this book because I had been involved in preparing a earlier version of this book about 10 years ago, which I did see having a lot of value in being used. And it had basically gotten out of date. And the person who let me know most directly that it was out of date was Kim Vermeer, and said, Walker, your book is out of date. It needs to be updated. When are you going to do that? And I said, when would I find the time? And then I thought, well, if I had a co-conspirator and collaborator, this might actually happen. And so I enlisted Kim in this process, and we together were able to pull it off. So I'll hand it over to you, Kim.
And of course, we wanted to make sure that the fundamentals, Walker and I both believe that project managers especially, but the whole ecosystem and industry for affordable housing need to have a firm grasp of the fundamentals to be able to consistently deliver the quality that we want to see and that we know organizations want to see. So we wanted to make sure that part was up to date, but we also wanted to give case studies. I've done a lot of professional education, and I know that we learn best from what other people have experienced, that peer learning and peer sharing. So we were very excited also to bring a whole new set of case studies into the book. And I loved the case study part of this process that we went through of getting to know the projects, of course, but the people and the organizations that are building them, and the passion and the commitment that everybody is bringing to the effort is really inspiring to me. And we wrote the book because project managers are at the center of the process, and the big wedges in the center are the things that they're trying to make happen every day in their projects, trying to figure out the design, the financing, the construction process, how it's going to be operated, and how all of that is fitting into their community and building the health and the well-being of the residents and the community around them. And then when we widen the lens to think about all of the affordable housing dimensions, then it's a huge amount of additional considerations or specific examples of the topics that the project manager is also tasked with trying to bring into the whole process and to deliver. And we know that's a lot. And so we wanted to try to create a all in one place basic resource for project managers to really get the grip on it. And then everyone else who's working in the industry, who's working to try to help project managers deliver on their projects, benefits from understanding both the context, the principles, and the implementation. Oh, my phone. And so that's why we wrote the book, to provide that resource. And we were very excited that Jonathan Rose from the Jonathan Rose Companies in New York wrote the foreword for us. And he calls all of us to be part of that tapestry of solutions, that each of us in the work that we're doing with individual projects and in our communities is part of bringing, weaving together a more just and more resilient community. And so we're inspired by him, and we hope that you are inspired by his words as well. So the content of the book, we start with chapter 1, which is the why green for affordable housing. And then chapters 2 and 3 are really about the process, and 5 is a chapter about cost and financing. And we also spend a lot of time on green operations, because you can build it green, but you got to keep it green. And then there's a lot of projects that weren't built to green standards, but there are a lot of opportunities to bring them up through the operations process. And then we have trends, and we have 14 new case studies. So in terms of making the case, what we really start with is, what is sustainable development? And one of the classic definitions of sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without preventing future generations from being able to meet their needs. And we see that that goal of sustainable development is really a dynamic balance between environment, economy, and social equity. And these are in balance, but they're in tension. And what the goal of sustainable development is to find mutually beneficial solutions that can work across all 3 of those dimensions. And so in many ways, affordable housing is already delivering on equity, economy, and in many cases, environment, even if it didn't originally intend to. In terms of equity, we're all about delivering safe and decent homes, and making sure that families have support structures in place through services and programs that help them to succeed. We produce mixed income communities, either in buildings themselves or by ensuring that there's affordable resources among the mix of housing that's available within communities. In terms of economy, just offering stable housing costs to families is huge for families' economies. Knowing that rents are going to be manageable within family budgets, knowing that costs are going to be relatively stable from year to year is very important. And typically, affordable housing is located nearer to jobs, education, and services, and allows families to access those things to improve their own lives. And often we're building in transit and other locations that are good for reducing energy use and the pollution that attends to transportation. So then if we think about green building, how does green building amplify and extend those core benefits that affordable housing is already providing? And in terms of equity, thinking about the health connections, that when we build to green standards, we know that we are creating healthier indoor environments that make homes a safer, healthier place for people to come back. And also, we are protecting the health of construction and manufacturing workers by selecting products that are safer and healthier, and by encouraging physical activity from where we locate buildings so that people are able to walk or to bike to take care of their daily lives. These are all examples, and you can see the same in the other columns as well.
Oh,
But how do you get to that? So you
yes,
have to get to a process. So let Walker talk us through the next chapter, integrated
yes.
design.
Thank you, Kim. So as we went through this, we kept coming back to these questions of what's fundamental to green building and the integration of green building into affordable housing. And we talked about systems and materials and some of this philosophy framing that Kim went through. But we also came back to this idea of the integrated design process as being fundamental, and really the idea of weaving into this tapestry, as Jonathan Rose said, the green attributes, and really weaving into the design the green attributes so they're fundamental to the project and not just an add-on. And so this sort of pithy statement that building is a system, or really a combination of multiple systems, and then design is a process to say, well, how do we structure the process in a way that we're able to sort of reveal the green opportunities early on and then be successful in integrating them into the design, carrying them out through construction, and then ensuring the delivery of the benefits through operations and maintenance. This diagram here shows that whole spectrum and is really just making the point that there's green decisions to be made when you're, looking at a site. And this could be that it's a site that it does have transit access or is in a community that has access to services and things that people can walk to or take transit to. There's things that go on in the planning process around density, maximizing the number of units, while maintaining livability and other things, or, trying to not spend too much money on parking if it's not really going to be essential. Schematic design gets into the massing and orientation, this charrette idea and approach that many of us have been through is a powerful tool in the integrated design process. It's not the be all and end all of the integrated design process, but it can be an important opportunity to bring everybody together in one room and sort of hash all these things out, make decisions, and usually find some areas for innovation. Carrying those things through in design development with research on feasibility, research on performance, cost would be number 6. 7 would be deciding what to actually put into the construction documents. 8, and then 9 and 10 in construction are the field verifications and then sending off for formal LEED or enterprise green communities or other certification if that's what a project wants to do. This is how I had thought it through. Kim has spent a lot of time thinking about O&M that we'll hear about later on. Again, so the green benefits are delivered through the life of the project, not just sort of installed at the time of the completion of construction. So you can just see some of these aspects that come in here on green practices in design, and Kim's going to take us through the first chunk of it, and I'll take the second piece.
So turning it from an idea into reality means dealing with a lot of different topics in the process. And of course, fundamentally, we start with where are we building and how does affordable housing fit in? So many of you are familiar with the smart growth concepts, and one of those is building near transit and creating walkable communities, mixing housing near to services and other community resources, and then making sure that there's a wide variety of housing types available for a wide variety of household types. So on the top, we have a picture from one of our case studies in, sorry, my mouse is a little twitchy this morning, in outside of Portland, Oregon. And below we have one of the first couple of buildings from Bartlett Station, which is a LEED for neighborhood development, redevelopment project just outside of Nubian Square in Boston. And just some of the different types of housing that we include as cases in the book. We can do very high density, high rise in New York. We can have duplexes in Laconia, New Hampshire. We've got single family, small scale homes in Santa Fe. We've got multifamily rental housing, comes in all types. So in this chapter, we really cover these 5 main topics. And so we'll go through each of them in turn. So location and site design. Location, it's still fundamental to think about where's the sun and where's the wind, and to think even in an urban context where we seem like we're blocked in by or locked in by blocks and street configurations, even within that, there are opportunities to think about how does a building relate to the sun, and where are the summer winds and the winter winds, and how can we think about the building that way. And then as far as the site design, this is from a LEED for neighborhood development project in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And although we featured some of the houses that Habitat for Humanity built as part of this project, this is a pathway that connects between the buildings and connects from block to block, so that at the mid-block point, people can connect from one side of the the site to another and create better connections between different parts of the neighborhood. This is another example of location and site design decisions. This was an infill development in Vista, California, and was really a catalyst for changing how the community and the local officials thought about what could be possible in their downtown development. And by locating themselves on a main street and very near a transit stop, they were able, and increasing the density, they were able to set a new model for what could happen in this community. That has been now followed by a number of subsequent developments that have happened. Stormwater management is another really important thing to think about early in the design process. And these are two different approaches. On the left, it's approach at the street level where runoff that's coming off the sidewalks is captured in a bioswale area adjacent to the roadway. So that plants are picking up some of the stormwater and it's being filtered and cleaned to some extent by the plants before it goes into the stormwater system. And on the right is the green roof at Coppersmith Village. So that is helping to slow down the stormwater that lands on a building and reduce to some extent how much ends up in the stormwater system. And then water conservation is another important topic, and Walker's gonna talk us through the next few topics.
Yes, thanks, Kim. So yes, water conservation is always sort of been in the green building palette, and it's a topic that is actually important across the country, even in communities where you think it rains all the time. They can end up having periods of drought and water shortages. What's great about this particular design strategy is it's very straightforward. The Environmental Protection Agency has a water sense label that is associated to high efficiency toilets, shower heads, and faucets, and all of these are like widely available, cost competitive, and so this is a fairly straightforward strategy. And then the pie charts here just show you where to focus your energy. So if you have to pick one, pick the toilet. It uses the greatest amount of water, followed by the shower based on average water use, and so on. So this is more about specifying than needing to change the design very much at all. Next category on energy. Just a couple examples here of on-site energy capture or generation systems with the solar thermal on the hot water on the bottom, to using the sun to preheat the water, or the photovoltaic panels. And Kim and I we're always sharing kind of coast to coast what's going on in practice, and there's definitely a big movement towards all electric buildings, I think at least in California and Massachusetts. And so we're seeing many more buildings using heat pump water heating heat pumps for heating and cooling, electric, and then offsetting that electricity use with on-site generation. But you can again see where you want to focus your energy just by the chart. It's on heating, cooling, and water heating. In affordable housing, water heating often comes up as one of the most cost-effective, just kind of makes sense strategies, because usually the heating is on the meter of the property owner. So there's a way for them to sort of quickly capture any investment in higher efficiency on their own bill, rather than making the investment by the owner, but having the benefit go to the tenants. And we'll talk about this split incentive issue in a few slides. Next. Lots of opportunities on materials. What you're seeing on the left is just a wall cross section that more speaks to getting the materials installed correctly, so that their insulation is installed correctly, air gaps are sealed, there's a clear water barrier, so we're not having moisture sort of entering into the cavity. And then on the right, just one example of a material label, Ford's Stewardship Council certified lumber, which shows up in all kinds of interesting places: cabinetries, interior doors, flooring, baseboards. I've yet to see a project fully framed with FSC lumber, but I see FSC showing up in a lot of wood products. And there's many other labels about carpet, the CRI for low VOC, green seal for other things related to air quality. And the book identifies these sort of commonly used certifications or labels to look for, which are on many of the materials that typically end up in affordable housing developments. Next slide. Then there is a bridge there between the material selection and indoor environmental quality. The first step is to just not introduce toxins into the environment if you can avoid it, which is by looking at a lot of those different air quality standards. And then of course to provide fresh air intake and then exhaust of stale air so that these systems are designed correctly and balanced correctly. And then no smoking, or if you're in a condition where smoking is highly likely to occur, to identify places where it's going to be sort of least disruptive or least impactful on the health of the other residents.
So one of the things we love about the book is having case studies that show how organizations pull all of those concepts together and produce terrific projects. And we're very happy today to have Rebecca Schofield from Homeowners Rehab here with us to talk about a project of theirs that's in the book. And in the box on the slide, you can see some of the things that we thought were important, which is why we wanted to include this case. So Rebecca, maybe I'll just ask you about those. How did you figure out that Auburn Court is in a great location, transit accessible just outside of Central Square in Cambridge? How did you figure out you had this opportunity to build where you already had apartments?
So this was a vacant lot, and we were doing a renovation of the original 77 units for the first phase of Auburn Court, and that's mixed income housing. So we work really closely with the city to build more affordable housing in such a high cost spot, and we're really struggling to compete for new sites on the market. So initially, we realized when we were in pre-development that we had some space here that wasn't used for much, hadn't been landscaped, and we could kind of no acquisition cost build some more units as part of the refinancing. So it was the combination of a lot with no acquisition costs plus the refinancing opportunity for the rest of the project.
And I recall you telling me that you did this, and then the city and some other owners of affordable housing in Cambridge realized this might be a replicable strategy. So what's happened with that?
Yeah, I mean, so some other, Just Start is another nonprofit in Cambridge that, and Somerville, I believe, and they have looked at this at some of their sites. The Cambridge Housing Authority, Moving to Work Authority, so they do their own development, so they've looked at this as well. And it's just, again, like for all of us working to build in a really expensive spot, this has just been the best way to finance new units in such a competitive market.
And tell us a little bit more about the process of incorporating active design thinking into the design process for the larger Auburn Court redevelopment, but especially here at 3 Brookline Place.
Sure. So because this was new construction and the rest was renovation, we had a really, fresh opportunity to do a lot of active design. So if you can see kind of in the middle of the photo, huge windows in a very open stairwell. So that is, we couldn't build an elevator here. We actually didn't dig at all. So it's an all electric building. And without the elevator, we wanted to make the stairwells really usable, really attractive. We have art in there. So that's one example of an active design priority. Big windows, good lighting, all of that. We tried to build in some accent walls, just really make the common areas engaging here. And for the overall site, we did a lot of placemaking. So with sculptures, with, new landscaping, new paths kind of throughout the site. And that felt really important for, this was built in a couple of different phases initially, and this is a new building. So we wanted to make sure that the site felt cohesive. Furthermore, it's mixed income with mid-rise and townhouse buildings. So a lot of the placemaking does have to happen outside and through active design. So bike parking, like it's a ton of other stuff to keep people moving and engaged.
And finally, Rebecca, this was an opportunity because it was a relatively small scale for HRI to really shift its design thinking from energy efficiency to carbon reduction. And as part of that, to go all electric. And as Walker said, this is a trend we're really seeing as we shift our thinking to carbon reduction from energy efficiency and this electrification. So tell us a little bit about why you made that shift in the thinking and how your experiment has worked out.
Sure, it's worked out well. Lower energy costs. I think a lot of people are reluctant to go electric because of scale, because of metering issues. So we worked with the Housing Authority to figure out utility allowances for that. We worked hard with our engineers to make sure that we were getting equipment that would work that was well sized, that would work for the use, that would be maintained, easy to maintain. So we did our due diligence up front, but I think Kim, you and Walker have done a ton of investigation on what kinds of equipment work, what kinds of approaches work to do all electric, do more sustainable. This is also LEED for homes, so and enterprise green communities, and so we really did pursue a whole bunch of knowledge that's already out there in terms of making this building really, really green, really reducing its carbon footprint overall as part of the new construction opportunity. So we really did want to take a comprehensive approach here and had a lot of lessons learned from the field. So that's from here we couldn't go all electric at our last one because it was really large. So we did have gas for hot water, but we expect to take this approach as often as we can in as many developments as we can.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. And for those of you watching, if you have additional questions for Rebecca, you can put them in the chat, and when we get to Q&A, we can circle back. So thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks.
So of course, a big challenge for all of us in all deals is how to make the numbers work. And with green, there's a lot of pressure about what does that mean. So Walker, do you want to pick this up again?
Yes, I certainly can.
And this is a picture of the courtyard behind 3 Brookline Place at Auburn Court as well. So another shot from that project.
Yeah, so the book lays out a couple of ways to think about cost. It also provides a summary of a number of studies that have looked at the cost of green building that show that it's around 2 to 5% increase in capital costs to get a green building. So just to give folks a frame of reference, it's not a massive increase. And the best way to keep the cost down is through the integrated design process. So the strategies are, again, part of the project versus a later stage add-on. The book goes through, talking about first cost, in which we do all the time. How much more does this cost than that? But then it says, well, you need to really be thinking about the benefits that those, additional cost items provide. If it's a more efficient piece of equipment, it will be saving you energy over time. So you can get into payback, you can get into return on investment. And this way of thinking works for items where there's a clear ability to track resources, terms of gas, kilowatts of electricity, gallons of water. Once we get into arenas like, reduced exposure to, environmental toxins in the living environment and potential reduction in asthma incidents, it becomes a little bit, several steps removed and harder to make that sort of causality or even, keep track of the dollars. We know the benefits are there, but these may be investments that we don't necessarily see paying off from a quantitative standpoint. And then we just discuss about thinking, who's paying, who's benefiting, and then also just being conscious of keep focusing first on the benefits that are most direct. So to the residents, to the owners of the buildings, and then to the surrounding community. If we can tackle things like climate change or resource management and recycling, let's do it, but let's not have the tail be wagging the dog, basically, and make sure there is a direct benefit. So you can go to the next slide. number of projects have used various forms of creative financing, whether it's been incentives from the state energy department or utility incentives. This particular case study, El Camino Crossing in Santa Fe, New Mexico, found a way to fold the green attributes, including on-site solar, into their home ownership model, that is based on a new markets tax credit approach, which they're able to do because they're also a community development financial institution, or CDFI. Go to the next slide. And I mentioned the split incentives problem earlier, which is basically the person who pays doesn't get the benefit falls to someone else. So what's unique about many affordable housing developments is that they have the ability to address the split incentive problem through exactly what we just heard about from Rebecca, which is the utility allowance. And so the way it works is there's a calculation of what someone can afford for housing, and that includes both rent and utilities. And so if you're able to reflect the fact that your project is, LEED certified, energy efficient, has on-site renewables generation, and that should lower people's utilities, then you should be able to reduce the utility allowance assumptions and raise the rent by a little bit. And once you raise the rent by just a little bit, maybe $10 a month, but across 50 units over the course of a year, it can end up enabling you to borrow another, $100,000 to $200,000 in long-term debt, which, could be a, $2,000 to $4,000 investment in each of the units, which could pay for the cost of these, these upgrades that we just talked about. So in California, there's a number of approaches that have been developed to use energy efficiency utility allowance, or effectively a projected project-based utility allowance, but all using this unique attribute of affordable housing that lets us to really address the split incentives problem, factor in the operating cost savings, and then factor that into the financing, which, as Kim and I will sometimes talk about, is not just getting green into the construction documents, but getting green into the pro forma also from an early stage of the game. Go to the next slide. And then we've seen on the policy side, this growth in including green measures in states' qualified allocation plans. And Massachusetts has done this for a long time. I was at a nonprofit Global Green for nearly 20 years, and we would do this annual review, not happening anymore, but in 2017, Massachusetts was getting an A because there were a lot of green measures mentioned in the QAP. Now, the degree to which those have all been implemented is a more vexing, challenging question to answer. But at least the trend here was that the value of green was being understood by the state housing finance agencies and finding its way into policy at the state level.
And again, apologies that my mouse is being so twitchy today. So, and so now you've built it, and what does that mean? So an important element of green thinking for organizations who are building green housing is operations. And there's really three elements to thinking about operations. The first, of course, is if you're building green, you want to keep it green. So understanding how to make that transition from construction into operations, making sure that residents know what they need to know to live well in their units, that the property management team, the property maintenance team know what's in the building and how to run the building, implementing policies like no smoking, like integrated pest management. There's a lot to do to make sure that a green project stays green. But there are also tremendous opportunities to green existing properties through operations and management. Simple things like changing out all of the water faucets to low flow fixtures, to implementing no smoking policies, to thinking about the paints that you're using, and whether if you still have carpets in projects, whether on flooring replacement, you can move to hard surface floorings, all kinds of basic things. And in the books, we actually include some checklists for organizations to use to really think, how could we prioritize green and make simple, basic changes that would have profound impacts. And then another important piece is green asset management, with the ongoing long-term thinking about projects and thinking about capital reinvestment, asset management sometimes often is involved in establishing the practices and the contracts for property management, or if property management is internal within an organization, working closely with the property management department on the operations piece of it. And so an example in the book about how green asset management can really position an organization to take advantage of opportunities. We featured the solar installations that happened at Avery Hill in Laconia, New Hampshire. And Sal Stephen Hubbard is here with us today to talk about this project a little bit. So Sal, say hello and tell people a little bit about Lakes Region Community Developers.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me here today. Lakes Region Community Developers has been around for about 27 years, serving the affordable housing needs of the Lakes Region. We started off delivering affordable housing in Laconia, New Hampshire. We now have housing in, I think it's 7 towns in the Lakes Region, which is central New Hampshire. We have a mission to provide healthy housing to our residents. And so a lot of the stuff that Walker talked about in terms of making sure that indoor air quality is healthy has been part of our strategy for a little while. We also, from an asset management point of view, have tried to make sure that our buildings are tight and operate well. Avery Hill was developed in 1993, before people were really talking about a lot of this stuff. In 1993, we did this was our first low-income housing tax credit project, and it was a 14-unit tax credit project. I know you folks from larger communities think that's very, very small, but believe me, we've done smaller. So in a few years ago, we decided that as a part of bringing this out of its tax credit partnership, we really needed to do some retrofitting and improve the operations of the property. It was kind of bleeding cash, actually. And we used various strategies, including turning some of the 3-bedroom units into 2-bedroom units because the 3rd bedroom was tiny and the bathroom was on the 1st floor, not on the 2nd floor where the bedrooms were. We did do things like taking out the carpeting on turnover of the units. We changed out all the faucets and shower heads and did a whole lot of the stuff that we could do quickly and more thoroughly at turnover. But we were still having a little bit of a vacancy problem and wanted to kind of incentivize tenants to live here. So we also did a lot of landscaping and we fixed up the exterior so it looked better. And then the Public Utilities Commission came out with a program of a grant to provide solar to low and moderate income individuals. In this property, residents paid rent and also their electric bills. They didn't pay for heat and hot water that was included in the rent. And what we decided to do was to retrofit these buildings with photovoltaic panels and take over the electric bills from tenants. And we got some grant funds. We got the PUC grant, which was, sorry, my cat is there, which was the big money. And then we had to get a small loan to fill a gap and finance that through increasing rents by $20 a month. And that saved tenants from $400 to $1,200 a year in return for $20 a month. So it's been really, really successful. And we have done it on another 12 units, and we hope to get a 32 unit property that we own to also have photovoltaics and take over the tenants' electric bills.
Thanks
We
for
see,
sharing all of that, Sal. And, you know, from our point of view as the people seeking out and then writing up the case studies, what was important to us was that Lakes Region had been so proactive in understanding what was going on in their properties and doing basic weatherization and doing upgrades wherever they could. And they had also gotten some solar potential studies done on their properties, so that when the public utility grant program came, they were ready to go. They already knew which properties were their best candidates for solar, and they had the basic information they needed and the relationships in place from the case, from the solar availability study to be able to quickly jump on the grant opportunity. So it was an example of, you know, long-term investment in asset management positioned them to be able to jump on the opportunity. And it sounds, Sal, like you've continued with that basic asset management discipline with the rest of your portfolio as well.
yeah, and one of the things we were asked by the Public Utilities Commission to give them sort of the legislature asked them to do a cost benefit analysis on the first round of low mod solar grants that they did. And we did find that while our projections were not completely accurate, that actually the property did benefit, the tenants benefited to a greater extent than we had projected. And of course, the planet benefited. So it was sort of three pieces to that sustainability puzzle, you know, sustainability for the future, sustainability for the asset, and sustainability for those households who don't have to budget their electricity. They just budget for their rent, which means they can stay in their houses and not have to worry about a particular issue hitting them in terms of a utility bill.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's, we love it when we're able to bring people from the case studies into our presentation and get more detail. So we're just about at the end. We're kind of back to where we started in terms of those trends. Maybe Walker, you want to take us to the end here?
Yeah. I'll go through this
Thank you,
quickly.
Sal.
So yeah, just looking back at yeah, thanks, Sal, that was great. So yeah, just, you know, Kim mentioned these at the beginning, but we certainly see these trends as sort of things sort of happening or continuing to happen in the future. Certainly climate is, you know, as Kim said, sort of climate is sort of jumped ahead of efficiency maybe, you know, looking at these issues of social equity, which we've seen over the last, you know, 6 to 9 months, you know, hugely important that there's increased awareness on those, about those issues. This connection between health and housing is really housing as a platform for other health interventions. And then looking beyond the building, looking at community scale, whether it's community scale solar, microgrids, lead for neighborhood development, but you know, really seeing the buildings as a catalyst for larger neighborhood transformation. Next. And then we just had a few findings, which are the groups that have, you know, decide to stick to the fundamentals of green and integrated design. And I think sort of continual sort of evolution and improvement are positioned to grow and embrace innovation when it arrives. So I think this sort of solar study that Kim mentioned that, you know, they had done in New Hampshire was an example of sort of being positioned to take on opportunity. Collaboration, you know, across all these disciplines, design, finance, development, you know, with government agencies critical. We've certainly seen this with a number of the NeighborWorks partners that, you know, doing a green building can start an organization to ask like, well, what are we doing organizationally, you know, beyond just with the buildings that we construct. And then climate clearly is changing and we need to be thinking about those impacts, whether it's colder winters, hotter summers, water shortage, you know, moments of high heat, and integrating this sort of thinking about resilience into projects and plans, just as we've learned to do for green building.
And with that, somehow, if you haven't already bought the book, here's your opportunity. It's available. Someone I saw asked in Audible. I don't think that we have done an Audible version of it yet. But you can buy it at Amazon. You can buy it at Barnes and Noble. If you buy it at Island Press and use Wells, you can buy it for 20% less. So we'll put this in the chat so that you have it there. And then I just want to put in a plug. I love the case study and the stories and the amazing successes that organizations are having so much that I'm starting a podcast where we can really feature these stories of green leadership that are happening all around the country. So we've got a few episodes almost ready to go. We're hoping to launch in the next month or so. And so if you go to this website, you can sign up to get on our mailing list to make sure that you are among the first to know when we launch the podcast. And of course, if you have stories you'd like to have us tell, we're always gathering ideas for that as well. So with that, we have a little time. We're kind of close to the 1 o'clock deadline, but Walker and I can stay longer for some additional Q&A time for those of you who are able to do that. John, I'll pass it back to you.
Oh, thanks, everyone. Yeah, so please throw your questions into chat. In the meantime, wanted to give a shout out to some work that's going on in Cambridge, Mass. The City of Cambridge's Net Zero Action Plan 5-year update is going to be discussed at a public meeting today at 4 p.m. And the link was shared by Maria Sorensen. So if you want to take a look at the chat, you can jump on that to see how you log into that presumably Zoom meeting as well, or Zoom gathering. I had a quick question. One of the things that I remember when I was at New Westra was gray water runoff being collected by the project up on Blue Hill Ave that was, I believe it was called Quincy Commons. It's been a few years. The gray water runoff was being collected into underground tanks to then actually be used to water the lawn. Are projects like that of, things of that nature are feasible? And then on a larger scale, I remember doing some for the Casanoff Bakery project, where there was a ground, they drilled down into the earth far enough to collect the hot water. And Kim, I'm going to defer to you a little bit on this, but how are these things cost effective? I mean, some of it, when I walked through it, and this is from a communications person, so my ignorance is very much on display. Is this stuff cost effective, or is it just experimental?
So I was the green consultant on both of those projects. So Quincy Commons, which is now called Ellen S. Jackson Apartments, does have the storm water, the rainwater is being collected, not the gray water.
Okay, so it's different.
So it's instead of, and it is being diverted to an underground tank, and that is being used to irrigate the water. So yes, that is making a difference, and it helps both with storm water management, and it reduces, good quality 2 cents a gallon water in Boston being used to water the grounds. So that does make a difference. The Casanoff Apartments, that which is now called Thomas Atkins Apartments, for
That's
those
right,
of you
yeah.
looking it up, call it by its current name, not its project name. So, it remains the case that in terms of heat pump technologies, water to air is still the most energy effective way to do it. But we did have to do very deep underground. It's a ground coupled ground source heat pump system there. We had to do the deep wells, and it is, that was very complicated. So there was a large upfront cost. I'm not sure that Noise Comunidad has done a lot of analysis of what their costs are and the tenant costs are to really understand the operational long-term benefits of it. When we did the modeling, at the beginning of the process, it, it was cost effective to do it. That it was lower energy costs for Nuestra Comunidad and lower energy costs for the residents.
Right.
So I think, but I think the upfront costs, especially on ground source heat pumps for larger scale buildings, then there are water quality issues and pumps and other things. It gets complicated and then the upfront costs get high. And so unless you can make that very clear through line to generate the additional revenue for a mortgage, or if you get some grant support to make it happen, it's hard to get the money up front, even if it would make sense for the long term.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have any questions? There's enough people that are still on. It's okay for us to unmute at this point, and have a little bit more of a commiseration. Many of us know each other. So, I see a post here. If Kim, can you post your email address?
Yes, I'm working on that right now.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I definitely showing off my dated time. I was at Nuestra for a while, for about 6 years, but I left in December of 2012 to join MACDC's team. I actually have another question, and this is actually for Kim. And actually maybe for Walker too. So recently, the governor of Massachusetts vetoed the climate bill that was put forth. And he put together a multi-page explanation as to why he vetoed it. One of the things that came up as a part of the process of explaining why he vetoed it was, sort of in a nutshell, tension between affordable housing and green and environmental work. That he felt that the climate bill was going to actually put pressures to decrease affordability of housing, and so there's that tension that I think are all struggling with in the affordable housing development field, in a sense, because we often have a dual or triple bottom line where we have to be financially sustainable in our work, of course. And then, of course, we need to achieve the goal of building affordable housing. And then, of course, striving to maintain climate resiliency. How do you think, if you were in the position of an advocate, not just here, but across the country, what are some of the key tenets or 2 or 3 salient points that you would say, yes, this is a way to erase or demystify some of that tension if it doesn't exist?
So I'll let Walker repeat his argument about how if you plan from the beginning and you work hard, it doesn't necessarily have to be a cost increase. That I think remains true, right? So there's still a lot of reflex response, especially when green is considered an add-on thing rather than a fundamental thing, that says, well, it costs more to add on this green stuff to my project, right? Then I think, one of the most interesting comments I heard at a US Green Building Council presentation around equity is, with all of these things, we have always paid, right? It's just a question of who pays. So when we build, or when we consign low-income people to high pollution areas of towns, because that's, where the low-cost land is, when we say, that we don't have to worry about healthy housing conditions because it costs too much money, who pays for that? It's the residents who pay for that. And so with some of the climate things, if these are important societal benefits, that climate is going to get us all, right? And if we need to make sure that we're all contributing to the solutions, then there, we need to have state level, federal level local level resources putting into making sure that affordable housing is included in the communities that are going to benefit from taking action.
Mm.
Walker,
Yeah.
things to
Yeah.
add?
Well, I was in sort of advocate mode just not too long ago, because the state of California Treasurer's Office in this year's QAP just stripped out all the sustainable building methods completely. They also stripped out a bunch of stuff on accessibility, because they're saying, you know, all these elevators are making things expensive, you know, along with all the green stuff. This was in a reaction to a cost study that was done that was identifying, you know, all of these add-ons are making housing expensive. So, you know, it costs something like $525,000 per unit to build, you know, affordable housing in California, at least in Southern California, which, you know, is shocking to everyone. And so I think the message was we have to go back to basics. I also think, John, it's this issue of like immediate issue versus long-term issue. So like the housing issue is so present, it's like we need to do whatever we can now to deal with the housing issue to avoid additional costs, even if it means contributing to longer term concerns about, you know, utility costs, you know, climate impacts. You know, I think the Avery Hill story was interesting because the way it was built in the early 90s was not energy efficient. And then later on, it ends up bleeding cash and maybe putting them in a position where they're struggling to, you know, stay in compliance with rent while, you know, having an economically stable property. So, you know, these are sort of future investments. My argument was taking all of this. So yours is a little different in Massachusetts. My argument was that the treasurer, by taking these items out of the QAP, was inconsistent with all the other climate policy in the state of California that's in place from the legislature and from the governor's office. In your instance, it sounds like it was more the climate bill that was driving it rather than the treasurer's office. But
And
you know,
I
the
do
main
believe
argument
that
is these are good investments for the long term and they pay back, and they've been demonstrated to pay back, you know. And I thought this statement, you know, for the future, for the asset and for the residents was really sort of beautifully said.
Great. Well, listen, everyone, we're 10 minutes past our time, I guess. So we're 10 minutes over time. I just want to thank very much Kim Vermeer and Walker Wells for sharing with us their expertise in the field and the work that they've done to promote green, affordable housing across the nation. It's wonderful to have them a part of our community, and I hope that all of you were able to learn a little something. I very much encourage you to go to Island Press and pick up a copy, or to reach out to Kim or Walker. Their emails have been put into chat, so please feel free to reach out to them directly as well. And I guess we're going to call it a day. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.